What happens when Britain's most brutally honest comedian sits next to a prince who can't handle the truth? On a Friday night that was supposed to be filled with laughter and lighthearted banter, two men found themselves locked in a war of words that would leave one of them speechless and the other victorious without even trying. Ricky Gervais didn't come to fight. He came to be funny. But when Prince Harry mistook honesty for hostility, the gloves came off. What followed was 15 minutes of television that producers couldn't have scripted if they'd tried. A masterclass in ego versus wit, privilege versus perspective, and what happens when someone who's never been challenged meets someone who doesn't care about crowns. By the time the dust settled, only one of them was still on the couch, and it wasn't the royal. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and smash that like. We bring you the most explosive celebrity moments every single week, and trust us, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. The familiar purple glow of the Graham Norton show bathed the studio in its signature warmth as the audience settled into their seats. Friday night in London, the weekend beginning, and the promise of entertainment hanging in the air like electricity before a storm. The iconic red couch sat empty at center stage, waiting for what the producers had billed as an unmissable lineup. Graham Norton bounded onto the stage with his usual infectious energy, arms spread wide as if embracing the entire audience at once. "Welcome, welcome, welcome," he exclaimed, his Irish accent dancing through the words. "Oh, we have a show for you tonight. I mean, genuinely, I'm slightly terrified, but in the best possible way." The audience laughed, already primed for whatever chaos was about to unfold. "Our first guest tonight," Graham continued, settling into his hosting rhythm, "is a man who has offended literally everyone on the planet at some point. And somehow, we keep inviting him back. He's a comedian, writer, actor, and professional truth-teller. Please welcome Ricky Gervais." The applause was thunderous as Ricky emerged from backstage, dressed in his characteristic black t-shirt and jeans, looking like he'd wandered in from a completely different, much more casual event. He waved lazily at the audience, a sardonic smile playing at his lips, before dropping onto the couch with a comfortable slouch of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. "Ricky," Graham beamed. "Always a pleasure, always a risk." "Thanks for having me, Graham," Ricky replied, his voice carrying that distinctive mixture of warmth and warning. "I promise to behave, for at least the first 30 seconds. Laughter rippled through the studio. "Now," Graham said, turning slightly toward the audience with theatrical anticipation, "our second guest needs no introduction, though he's certainly provided many of his own over the years. He's a prince, a podcaster, a memoirist, and one of the most talked about people on the planet. Please welcome Prince Harry." The reaction was different this time, louder in volume, but more complex in tone. Cheers mixed with something harder to define, an undercurrent of curiosity that bordered on anticipation. The audience wasn't just excited to see Harry, they were wondering what might happen. Harry emerged with practiced confidence, dressed in a dark blazer over an open-collared shirt, projecting the carefully calibrated, casual but royal image he'd cultivated since relocating to California. His smile was wide, his wave perhaps a beat too long, as he crossed the stage and settled onto the couch beside Ricky. The two men couldn't have looked more different. Ricky, slouched and relaxed, radiating the energy of someone who genuinely didn't care what anyone thought. Harry, upright and carefully positioned, projecting an image even while sitting on a talk show sofa. Graham clapped his hands together. "Now this is exciting. Two men who have absolutely no filter. What could possibly go wrong?" Ricky snorted. "I have no filter because I don't care. I think Harry's working on a different system entirely." It was a joke, clearly a joke, delivered with Ricky's trademark smirk and obvious playfulness. But Harry's smile flickered, just for a moment. "I think," Harry said, his tone measured, "that honesty takes different forms for different people." Ricky nodded agreeably. "Absolutely, some people are honest, and some people are honest when it's profitable." He turned to Graham with an innocent expression. "Sorry, are we doing this already? I thought we'd at least get through the first question." The audience laughed. Graham covered his face with his hands in mock despair. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's start with something safe," Graham said quickly. "Ricky, you've got a new special coming out. Tell us about it." Ricky launched into a description of his latest work, self-deprecating and sharp in equal measure. He talked about aging, about cancel culture, about the absurdity of celebrity worship. The audience hung on every word, laughing at his observations, nodding at his insights. When he finished, Graham turned to Harry. "And Harry, you've been busy with your foundation work. How's that going?" Harry straightened slightly, clearly more comfortable with this territory. "It's going well, Graham. We're doing important work around mental health, veterans' issues, things that actually matter. It's gratifying to use whatever platform I have for something meaningful." "Whatever platform you have," Ricky repeated, as if tasting the words. "Mate, you've got Netflix, Spotify, book deals, speaking fees. I'd say the platform's pretty substantial." It wasn't said cruelly. It was said the way Ricky said everything, as an observation, a fact, something that struck him as amusing. But Harry's expression cooled. "I've built those platforms to share important messages," Harry replied. "It's about using visibility for good." Ricky nodded, still smiling. Sure. Though most people who want to share important messages don't charge 30 million quid for the privilege. But what do I know? I'm just a comedian." The audience laughed, but there was an edge to it now. They could feel something building. Graham jumped in quickly. "Speaking of comedy, Harry, do you ever watch Ricky's specials? Any thoughts?" Harry's smile returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I appreciate comedy that punches up, not down." Ricky turned to look at him directly for the first time. "Punches up? Mate, I make fun of everyone equally. That's the point. The moment you start deciding who's acceptable to joke about based on their status, you've stopped doing comedy and started doing propaganda." "Some people are more vulnerable than others," Harry countered. "Surely you can see that." Ricky's eyebrows rose. "Vulnerable? You grew up in a palace. You had servants. You never had to worry about where your next meal was coming from. In what universe are you vulnerable?" The audience went quiet. Graham's eyes widened. Harry's face flushed slightly. "Vulnerability isn't just about money. It's about being hunted by the press, having your privacy destroyed, watching people you love get hurt by." "By what?" Ricky interrupted gently. "By attention? By fame? By the privileges that come with being born into the most famous family on earth?" He shrugged. "I'm not saying your life was easy. I'm saying perspective is important. There are people in this audience who work 60 hours a week just to pay rent. Their kids get bullied at school, and they can't afford therapy. That's vulnerability. Having paparazzi outside your mansion isn't quite the same thing." The audience applauded, not everyone, but enough to shift the energy in the room. Harry leaned forward. "You don't know what you're talking about. You've never had to live my life." "True," Ricky agreed pleasantly. "And you've never had to live theirs." He gestured toward the audience. "That's my point. We're all dealing with different challenges. The difference is, most people don't get millions of dollars to complain about theirs on Netflix." Graham tried to intervene. "Okay, let's maybe—" "No, hold on," Harry said, his voice rising slightly. "I think it's important to address this. There's this narrative that I'm somehow ungrateful, that I don't appreciate what I had. But you don't understand the pressure, the suffocation, the constant scrutiny." Ricky held up a hand. "Harry, mate, everyone in entertainment deals with scrutiny. Every politician, every athlete, every celebrity. The difference is, they don't constantly tell everyone how hard it is while also actively seeking more attention. You can't simultaneously complain about media intrusion and sign deals to broadcast your life story. Pick a lane." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The audience held its breath. Harry's face had gone from flushed to something closer to white. "That's not fair. I'm sharing my story on my own terms. There's a difference between being exploited and choosing to speak." "Is there?" Ricky asked, genuinely curious. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've made more money talking about being a royal than you ever would have made being one. If that's exploitation, sign me up." Several audience members laughed before catching themselves. Graham leaned forward urgently. "Ricky, maybe we should—" "No, this is good," Ricky said, still looking at Harry. "This is the conversation no one's allowed to have. Everyone tiptoes around it, and I don't do tiptoeing. Harry, you seem like a decent bloke who's had some genuinely tough experiences. Your mom dying when you were young, that's horrific, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But that tragedy has become a shield you use to deflect any criticism of your choices as an adult. And at some point, mate, You've got to let people respond to what you're doing now, not what happened to you then. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. Harry stared at Ricky, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like pain. "You have no right," he said quietly, "to talk about my mother." Ricky's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "I'm not talking about your mother. I'm talking about you, about how you invoke her memory every time someone questions you. That's not honoring her. That's using her." The audience gasped, actually gasped. Graham covered his face with both hands. "Oh God, this is happening." Harry stood up. The movement was sudden enough that a camera operator had to scramble to adjust. "This is exactly what I mean," Harry said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is the cruelty that passes for entertainment in this country. You sit there making jokes about people's pain because it gets you applause." Ricky didn't stand. He barely even shifted in his seat. "I'm not joking about your pain, Harry. I'm pointing out that pain doesn't make you immune from observation. You've written a book about your family's private matters. You've done documentaries. You've given interviews to anyone who will listen. You've made your pain a product. I'm just a customer pointing out that the product has some consistency issues." "I'm trying to change things," Harry's voice rose. "I'm trying to break cycles, to speak truth to power, to—" "To what?" Ricky interrupted, his voice still maddeningly calm. "What have you actually changed? You've made a lot of money. You've generated a lot of headlines. But what systems have you reformed? What institutions have you transformed? You keep talking about impact, but I'm struggling to see what's actually different because of anything you've done." Harry's fists clenched at his sides. "You're just another bitter person who can't stand that someone left the system and succeeded." Ricky laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement. "Mate, I've never been in any system. I grew up on a council estate in Reading. I'm not bitter about your success. I'm confused by your victimhood. You're rich, famous, and living in a Montecito mansion with a wife and kids. By most measurements, you've won. So, why do you keep acting like you've lost?" The question landed like a punch. Harry opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Graham saw an opening. "Maybe we should take a breath here. Both of you have valid—" "No," Harry said sharply. "I'm not going to be lectured about my life by a comedian who's made a career out of being offensive." Ricky nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair. I have made a career out of being offensive. The difference is, I know I'm doing it, and I don't pretend it makes me a hero. You seem to think complaining about your privilege is somehow noble." "I'm not complaining about privilege. I'm speaking about reality." "Your reality," Ricky corrected. "A reality most people can't even imagine. You flew to your grandmother's funeral on a private jet and complained about the seating arrangements. That's not relatable, Harry. That's not heroic. It's just weird." The audience laughed despite themselves. Some of them tried to stifle it, aware that they were laughing at a prince's expense. But the observation was too precise to ignore. Harry's face had gone from white to red. "This is exactly the kind of petty cruelty that drove my mother to her death. The constant picking, the mockery, the refusal to see people as human beings." The room went cold. Ricky's expression changed for the first time, not to guilt, but to something more serious. "Harry, I'm not the press that chased your mother. I'm a comedian on a chat show. If you can't tell the difference between a tabloid that published stolen photos and a bloke making observations about public statements you chose to make, then you're not fighting the right battle. You're all part of the same machine," Harry insisted. "You all feed off the same toxic culture of tearing people down." "No," Ricky said firmly. "I'm part of a culture that believes everyone, including princes, should be open to scrutiny and criticism. That's not toxicity. That's democracy. You don't get to tell everyone your opinions and then demand they only respond with agreement." Harry shook his head, backing away from the couch. "I'm done. This is pointless." "Harry," Graham said, rising slightly from his chair, "let's just—" "No." Harry's voice was final. "I came here expecting a conversation, and instead I got an ambush." Ricky raised an eyebrow. "An ambush? Mate, I've been sitting on a couch making observations. You've been standing up and raising your voice. If anyone looks ambushed right now, it's not me." Harry pointed at him. "You think you're so clever. You think being cruel is the same as being intelligent. And you think being offended is the same as being right," Ricky replied calmly. "We all have our delusions." The audience held its breath. The tension had reached a breaking point. Harry looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at Graham's worried face, at Ricky's infuriatingly relaxed posture. "You know what?" Harry said, his voice dropping to something cold and hard. "This country deserves people like you. Small-minded, mean-spirited people who tear down anyone who tries to do something different." Ricky smiled. "And you deserve audiences that never question you. Unfortunately, you walked onto my couch tonight, and I don't do hero worship. Not for celebrities, not for politicians, and definitely not for people who were born into privilege and act like they earned it." That was the final blow. Harry turned and walked toward the exit, his movements sharp and aggressive. "Harry!" Graham called out, standing fully now. "Harry, please!" But Harry didn't stop. He didn't look back. He walked straight past the cameras, past the stunned crew members, and disappeared through the backstage exit. The studio doors closed behind him with a definitive thud. For a long moment, no one spoke, no one moved. The audience sat in frozen shock. Then Ricky turned to Graham with an apologetic shrug. "Was it something I said?" The audience exploded, not in boos, but in laughter and applause. The tension that had been building finally broke, released in a wave of disbelief and something that felt almost like relief. Graham sank back into his chair, rubbing his forehead. "Ricky, Ricky, Ricky, Ricky." "What?" "I was being friendly." "You called him delusional." "I said we all have delusions. That's inclusive, not insulting." More laughter. Graham shook his head, but there was a smile creeping onto his face despite his best efforts to look disapproving. "Well," Graham said, turning to the camera with the practiced ease of a man who had seen a lot of unexpected things in his career, That was certainly something. I'd apologize, but honestly, I'm not sure to whom." Ricky leaned back into the couch, completely relaxed. "Don't apologize. That was the most honest conversation I've had in months. Shame it had to end early." Graham turned to him. "Did you know that was going to happen? Did I know that saying obvious things would upset someone who's built an entire brand around never being questioned?" "No, Graham, I had no idea. I'm shocked and appalled." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut, and the audience loved it. "You really don't hold back, do you?" Graham asked. Ricky shrugged. "Life's too short, and honestly, I like Harry. Or I like the Harry who served in Afghanistan and did charity work without needing a camera crew present. That Harry was interesting. This Harry, the one who tells everyone how hard his life is while cashing checks most people couldn't dream of. That Harry's harder to root for." Graham nodded slowly. "Do you think he'll be all right?" "He'll be fine. He'll go back to his mansion, post something on social media about being silenced, and his supporters will rally around him. That's the playbook now. Any disagreement is persecution, any criticism is abuse, and any challenge is trauma. It works brilliantly for fundraising." The audience laughed again, but there was something thoughtful in the sound now. "But here's the thing," Ricky continued, leaning forward slightly. "I don't actually dislike the man. I dislike the idea that some people are above questioning. I dislike the notion that wealth and fame should come with protection from criticism. I grew up poor. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion. They didn't have time to process their feelings on podcasts. They were too busy surviving. So, when I see someone who was literally born into royalty complaining about how hard visibility is, something in me rebels. Not because I'm heartless, but because perspective matters." Graham was quiet for a moment. "That's actually quite profound," Ricky grinned. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain." The audience applauded warmly. Graham turned back to the camera. "Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ricky, assuming anyone else is brave enough to join him on this couch." The lights dimmed for the commercial break, but the buzz in the studio didn't fade. Something had happened tonight. Something that felt larger than a disagreement between a comedian and a prince. Ricky had done what Ricky always did, told the truth without decoration, observed the obvious without apology, and refused to treat anyone as sacred. And Harry had done what Harry had been doing for years, claim victimhood when challenged, invoke tragedy when questioned, and walked away when the conversation stopped going his way. The cameras had captured it all. By morning, the clips would be everywhere. By afternoon, think pieces would proliferate across every news outlet. By evening, lines would be drawn, sides would be chosen, and the conversation would rage across social media with all the nuance and restraint that platform was known for. But in the moment, in the quiet of the commercial break, what remained was simpler: a couch with an empty seat, a comedian who hadn't moved, and an audience who had witnessed something they wouldn't forget. Ricky Gervais didn't set out to make Prince Harry walk off a television show. He set out to be honest. In a world where honesty had become controversial, that was apparently enough. The rest of the show went on. Ricky told jokes, shared stories, and charmed the audience with the same irreverent wit that had made him famous. Graham recovered his composure and guided the conversation with his usual skill. The musical guest performed, the credits rolled, but no one who was there that night, no one who watched from home, no one who saw the clips in the days that followed, forgot what had happened. Because it wasn't just about a prince storming off in anger. It was about what happens when someone who's been surrounded by yes men finally encounters someone who simply says no. It was about the difference between fame and substance, between visibility and value, between telling your story and weaponizing it. And it was about one fundamental truth that Ricky Gervais had spent his entire career demonstrating. The most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth. Even when, especially when, it makes powerful people uncomfortable. Prince Harry went back to California. Ricky Gervais went back to writing jokes. Graham Norton went back to hosting shows. But the conversation they started that night continued long after the cameras stopped rolling. And somewhere, in living rooms and comment sections and kitchen table discussions around the world, people kept asking the same question Ricky had asked. If you've won everything, why do you keep acting like you've lost? No one ever gave him a satisfactory answer. What do you think? Was Ricky too harsh, or did Harry's attitude go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video. We've got more explosive moments coming your way, and trust us, you won't want to miss what happens next.